I probably owe my career to, who's the director? Claude Zidi?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because he made La Totale, and then that was adapted, and that became True Lies. And
bonjour, ici Stéphane Moïsakis et je suis avec mon comparse Julien Dupuis,
Bonjour,
mon habituel
Stéphane.
comparse Julien Dupuis. Nous sommes à la Cinémathèque française et nous sommes ici à l'occasion de l'exposition L'Art de James Cameron qui se déroule jusqu'en janvier prochain. Et aujourd'hui, nous interviewons le grand Russell Carpenter qui est le chef opérateur de James Cameron, avec lequel il a travaillé sur True Lies.
C'est son chef opérateur principal, on peut dire comme ça.
Sur Titanic et sur Avatar, La Voix de l'eau. I will ask you the first question.
Okay.
I mean, is it true that you met Jim Cameron at the time at a birthday party?
Yeah, sure. I had, my path up until that time was, I had been shooting a lot of documentaries and stuff, and then this director that I knew said, we could kind of make this horror movie in our backyards, and I did that, and it was miraculously released for 2 weeks. But I thought, oh, that was the gold standard for me. I mean, that was great. And I didn't move far. I lived close to LA, but I moved into LA. And I started competing. I found out that, oh, the competition is just incredible. And so well, what happened basically was I wound up shooting a bunch of like horror films, action films, chopsaki films and stuff like that. And that was, along the way, I shot this incredibly bad movie called Solar Crisis.
Yeah, sure.
If you've seen it. But it was, when I saw it at the end, I said, oh, that's one bad movie, but I liked a lot of the things that I did in it. So go ahead.
It's interesting because you had to work with Richard Edlund, who did the special visual effects on Solar Crisis. And at the same time, you worked with Mike Garris on Critters 2.
Yes.
You also worked on some of the Nightmare on Elm Street movie.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is that all those movies, they had a lot of special effects, visual effects, sometimes very low-key special effects. And we were wondering if these experiences helped you in your work with Jim Cameron, because he likes
it was interesting because I listen to how other cinematographers get started, or I read about them, and usually, they got influenced by some really profound movie. And yet, when I was growing up, and this is back in the 1950s and 60s, the things that I watched were like the original King Kong movie, black and white. But then I realized, I look at that movie and I go, Avatar. And there's just a through line there. Not that I ever imagined. I had no idea that was going to happen. And I watched, Godzilla. This is nothing deep here about the kind of movie that I was attracted to. And all these, and things like Mothra and all these Japanese films. And years later, I went back and I looked at those films and I go, these are terrible. And they're so bad. No, but they were so cheesy. The way they were done. Let's just say these are so cheesy. But to me, as a very young person, I just thought this was amazing.
And you kind of share that with James Cameron because he grew up as well with B movies from the 50s, the 60s, and everything.
So and then when I was 16. A couple of teachers had this idea that for summer they'd take some of the students and have this kind of multimedia thing going on. It was only like 2 weeks long, but so what we studied was Sgt. Pepper's Hearts Club Band, because that was amazing at the time. But they showed 2 Ingmar Bergman movies. One was Wild Strawberries, and the other was Persona. And, I didn't get it. I kind of did, but I didn't really understand in depth. But the images, and especially like the prologue to Persona, that's when that grabbed me. And I thought, I see poetry that I never imagined you could see. So there's that thread. But the main thread is, as I grew up and started to watch more films and go to theaters, I had to feel like what I was watching was a completely magical experience. And the people who did this must be just like sorcerers and magicians to make these illusions. And I was totally, it just grabbed me. And I said, I want to do this. And but it seemed like it took forever to get anything going. And I had a lot of time to study film because I was unemployed a lot of the time. And what happened was I got fired off. I did 4 episodes of The Wonder Years, the original. I don't know if you know it in France, but it was.
We know.
I was fired after 4 episodes, and I think what they wanted in a director of photography was kind of a policeman to tell the director, what the rules of the game there were. And I wasn't that guy. And I really desperately needed something to do. I got an offer to do Pet Sematary 2. I didn't want to do it, but because it was just like one more horror film. And I had the best time on that film. The people were so great. You never know. The experience can be so different than what you think it's going to be. And it was on that picture, first, Eddie Furlong, he had 2 guardians, and after about 6 weeks of shooting the movie, they said, you and Jim Cameron would probably get along really well. And I go, yeah, sure, yeah. But then Jim came to the party, and we sat on the stairs of the house that we were shooting, and we just talked for a while. And I thought, well, that was really cool. I got that. And then.
Do you remember what you?
I don't remember what I talked about, but then I got a call a few, I don't know how many months later, from his producer, and the producer said, Jim wants to do a non-union picture, and he's looking for a non-union cinematographer, which I definitely was. And so I took the footage from the horrible film, and I took the snazzy stuff, because I had retimed it to how I thought it should be, and showed that to him. And he said, okay, I think this will work. And 2 weeks later, that film just went away because the person had the rights to the movie. That person wasn't going to give them up. And that was.
It was the crowded room.
It was the crowded room. Boy, you guys have done your homework. Yeah, it was a crowded room, which I think eventually got 25 years later, got at least I think it was on Netflix or something like that.
But did you have a little time to do some kind of test on this project? Or? No, not at all. Nothing. Okay.
So then I got an opportunity to work with John Woo. That was his first film in the United States. And oh my God, the guy was, his films are so violent. And he is so nice. You would not know that these films were coming out of this person who's just such a dear person. And I got a call in the middle, and this is like early 1990s, and so the internet hadn't really arrived. Yeah. I got a call from his producer, and this is my stupidity. She said, Jim wants to talk to you about a project that he's doing, and so when you get back and you have lunch, and I said, yeah, I can have lunch, and I never asked what the film was. And so at that time, there were 2 trade papers in Hollywood, the Daily Variety and the Hollywood Reporter. Right. And my crew and I would get those, and I would pour through them to see, well, what's he doing with it? I'm sure it's got to be a documentary and blah, blah, blah. And I tell you, and this is true, and then there's this article about this Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, True Lies. And I just blow right past that. Well, okay, that's a big feature. Okay, and it turned out when I got back, I went to lunch. We started talking about it, and halfway through the lunch, he just started saying, and when we go to Washington, and when we go to this, and when we do that, And that's the fireworks are just going off in my head. Why is he's saying we? You know, and that was probably, I mean, really it was the biggest break I ever got. And it put me right up against what I call my stuff. And my stuff, my story is that Hollywood is this enormous place, and it's just filled with people that are, you know, I had no idea what Hollywood was, but I had certain suppositions. But I would think, but what if I have to work with some really demanding, scary director? And so life somehow worked its way around and said, okay, we're gonna put you to the test. And the pre-production went really well, and but people started telling me these stories that, you know, I don't know if you've heard this, but Jim can be really, really hard on his directors of photography. Yeah. Because Jim, and you've probably heard this before, Jim's approach to making a film is, I don't know how to make this film yet. I'm going to figure it out by the time the film's done and we call wrap. I'll figure it out how to make the film. So what I need are people, you know, who want to be challenged, who want to be tested, and I did want that. And you know, I'm thinking, of course, he knows he'll probably get more out of somebody who's coming from that position than somebody who's done 15 films. So I did that film. Not only did I work with a scary director on True Lies, but I worked with a terrifying director on True Lies, because his position is, we're explorers, and if you have to have the commitment of, you know, Ernest Shackleton going, you know, across the polar, or it's the Crusades and you're taking the castle. You have to have that kind of commitment, and that's what he demanded. And you know, it was always that way. But he early on, and certainly on True Lies, he had a fierceness that went along with his commitment to making the film. And you just had to learn to put up with that. And of course I put up with it, because my mantra was, I've got to have this credit. This is the biggest credit I'll ever get, you know. And and so that was the mantra, and whatever happened, you know, you just tried to, you know, hang on.
This is what you meant, because I read again the American Cinematographer article on True Lies, and you said in that working for Jim is like playing in the toughest room in Vegas.
Yeah, no, and every day.
Yeah.
And you just know, I mean, and it was true, because still to this day, I don't know why he picked me. And
you don't know? You don't have a clue?
I don't really know, except that I think that he saw somebody with the same love of the adventure, of the great, or the great test, and he saw that. And on any project, he's testing himself probably more than he's testing anybody else. And that's how deep his level of commitment is.
Actually, I have a question about that project. I mean, did you watch La Totale before working on True Lies? No?
No. And I still haven't seen it. Although when I read about it, because I thought, God, I'm going to Paris, and and here it is, and I'm going to get in front of people and mention how True Lies came about, but I've never seen this, and I can't find it. It's very, you can't rent it, you can't. But now I really want to see the film.
Yeah, I was wondering then, did you have some kind of specific references when you were working on True Lies? I'm asking you this specific question because I believe that before each project, you have a kind of booklet.
Oh, yeah.
In which right. You're gathering every kind of references for the light and the look of a picture.
Well, it's very interesting, because especially early on, I went through this period where I would I would write down everything. I mean, not only about what I thought the script was or what the director would say about the script, but then, of course, I would look at all the locations and I'd kind of tear them apart from the technical point of view. What is this location going to give me? What are the gifts of it? And does after 4 o'clock in the afternoon, does the same location become a total nightmare? And it's going to take all kinds of technology to make it look right. You know, you really have to have a give and take. But it was about everything. And I really, really tested things. And at the end of it, I probably had a book that thick. And the reason, I think there are 2 reasons for having a book like that. And I probably mentioned it in the article. But one, if you've put that book together, now you have a really good idea. I mean, something's been invested in your brain and everything, and about what you feel you're going to do. Also, knowing that filmmaking is so hard, and especially, you know, days are still long, but they were even longer in those days. And you're not going to be the same human being in the 4th week that you were in pre-production. You're going to be dead tired. You're not going to be firing on all cylinders. It's not going to happen. So you go back to that book and say, when I had a brain, this is what I had planned out. You know, and it's also something that you can show the rest of the crew. So, some of this just sounds like war stories, but sometimes finding out what Jim really wants is you're not kind of going to get it until you go out on the Scout and you kind of see what he's up to on the Scout. But we knew that but first of all, you have some really broad brushstrokes to deal with. Okay, this fellow, we're definitely in the James Bond genre here.
Okay.
And so you kind of go with that. And that's a very wide arena, and then you work with that. And usually I just start
Big sets,
yeah,
like the headquarters of the spies, for instance, with a lot of lights. And
yeah, so you get that. And this is really, I mean, it's kind of a funny story, but when I came on to, and you probably know all of this, when I came on to Titanic, I was not the first choice for Jim. An excellent, amazing cinematographer who is, I don't know if you, especially if you've seen some of his early work. And The Natural, of course, phenomenal. But they weren't, the chemistry wasn't so good there. And so the problem was, Caleb's agent, he had the same agent I had. So we kind of had to be very discreet. You know, and I talked to Caleb. I said, are they, you know, I called him up and I said, well, I'm hearing that this and this is going on, and I just want you to know that that I got a call, and that, I'm a member of the American Society of Cinematographers, and kind of one of the ethos there is that if you hear this, you try to call the director of photography, who they might consider changing out, and just tell him, mostly him in those days, that this is what's going on, so he gets a chance to, maybe he can just write things, you know, up. But it didn't happen. But still, during that time, just legally things were a little touchy, and I had just a couple phone calls with Jim before we started the movie.
Yeah.
Whoa!
And so I asked him.
You mean it was in the middle of the shooting?
Well, they shot the prologue to the movie, which is all the modern stuff.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And then I came in and did the period piece. Okay. But so I talked to Jim and I said, well, Jim, what are your ideas about the movie? What do you think it should look like? He says, you know what these movies look like? It's a period film.
And that's it.
That's it.
Good luck.
So I go to, you know, so I go look at it, but I did know that he really wanted a classic look, and he did want.
What do you mean by classic look? Because
classic look for American films, let's say.
Yeah.
Because they Well, actually, it was an or British director, David Lean, who's British. But the sense of you're trying to tell a movie on a really enormous scale, you know. And even though, like in Dr. Zhivago, it's a love story, and I think he's just kind of saying, this is a film that has to work as an epic, but it's also a film, you've got to be in there and with those two characters to make, if that doesn't work, it's just boat sinks, you know. So what I did was I looked at some of Caleb's work on The Natural, if you've ever seen it. It's,
the Robert Redford movie?
Yeah, the Robert Redford movie. It's really amazing. But then I looked at David Lean movies. I looked at that time, I looked at a lot of, oh God, I forgot the name of the people who did Howard's End and Room with a View.
Yeah, James Ivory.
Yeah. So I was kind of filling up my quiver with, you know, it wasn't supposed to go so far away from anything. It's got to. He wanted to very much to remind people of a more traditional film, and that's what I think. I'm just going to spin my wheels here and just talk about a bunch of stuff, but so that, and then of course I go as a cinematographer. I just run to the art department and I see what they've been doing, because you know that Jim's going to have a hand in every one of the. And so I looked at that.
And the practical lights are very important, especially in Titanic.
Yeah. Then I went to the visual effects department.
Yeah.
And because and that gave me an idea. And I also heard that he really loved this book, Marshall, and the illustrations in the book.
Kent Marshall.
Yeah. And there was but in those books, even though Titanic sank on, was like a new moon or something that was very dark, but still the blues were very luminescent, which is something Jim really liked.
Yeah, sure, we have to talk about that.
Yeah. So I came onto the movie, I was working on another movie, I had to keep shooting that.
In pre-production, in the sense of Titanic, while you were working on another movie?
I was working on a Chris Tucker movie with...
Money Talks.
Yeah, Money Talks. It was one of, and I was not, and the director was a new director at that time, Brett Ratner, and Brett was, when I finally screwed up the courage to, you know, kind of tell him I was moving on to Titanic, he was so generous, you know. He said, okay, well, that's an opportunity you're not going to pass up. However, at the same time, I'm not down in Mexico during the week. I said my gaffer, my key lighting technician down there, and I say, check it out. Go down there and check it out. Tell me what's happening. I get a call on Monday morning. I said, where are you? He says, I'm in Mexico and I'm not coming back. He says, if I come back, there's no way this movie is going to start on time. He says, there is so much to do down here. And so we'll move these people around on the crew, and I'll take some of these people, and we'll be working down here. Then I would go down every weekend, and every weekend I went down to watch. It really was like some gold rush town, you know, California gold rush, where towns get thrown together in 6 days. Well, they were building these studios so fast. And this was about, I don't know how many miles below the U.S.-Mexican border. And it was really amazing. And really the enormity of it was.
This is the big thing.
This is the big thing.
The set was huge.
Yes.
The amount of light you need to light a set like that, it's crazy, you know?
Well, yeah, so a lot of, especially the first part, was just technical and logistics coordination. Because once you take a look at this ship, which looks like a ship on one side, and on the other side it just looks like some Terry Gilliam Brazil thing, cables going everywhere. You know what the thing. It's just a mess back there. Complete terror of cables running this way and that way. But my gaffer at the time, John Buckley, he did an amazing job figuring out how this film was going to be put up on its legs. He submitted the first lighting order, and 20th Century Fox, which was at that time, Paramount had an end into the picture. They said, this order, this is insane, this is crazy. We're going to send down some efficiency experts to tell you how to whip this into shape.
Yeah, okay.
So by that time, I'm down there. I'm off the other movie, down there, and they send two folks down. John goes out with them for a day. And they come back, and their assessment is, you don't have enough lights for this movie. You need more lights, and we're going to, and to Fox's, and they dug things out of everywhere. And I went, starting to just talk about how big it was. Well, you have, just on the one side of the ship, you have 700 portholes. So, and Jim wanted the light from the ship to, when the lifeboats went out, he wanted, so that's 700 lights there. And then you have a light, and these weren't big fancy lights, but just some light to light the interior of the cabins. So there's at least 700 of that. So you haven't really even started to really light the ship, but you've got 1,400 lights committed to it. And it was, I mean, it was totally beyond anything that I had ever done.
And the amount of electricity, of energy you need for this kind of light, for this kind of set, how did you manage that? Because you were in Mexico?
Yeah,
and
I think it was a combination of generators. We had a lot of generators, but it was even a combination of that, and I think the government, Mexican government, was able to run a line in to power the rest of things. And you know, I can't remember exactly how it was, except that I can remember that when it was all done, we had, I know it sounds crazy, we had about 10 miles of cable running through the ship and out to all and everything else that had to be done. And it was very different for me because we discovered that we had to basically, it's not like you could work with a crew. You had to work with crews. You had to divide the ship up, and these people would work in this part of the ship. These people will work in the chimneys. These people will work out here. These people will work in the water. And you had the crew that you were shooting with. Then you had the crew that was preparing for the next day. And then you have a crew that's preparing for the sets that we're not going to get to for 3 weeks. So again, in that way, it was way beyond anything that I had done. And so I mean, I just have to say, I was just so lucky to have people who had done bigger projects, and maybe nobody had done anything as big as this, but at least could devise a path forward to get this done. Speaking about how big things were, Jim wanted to go out and shoot the ship at night, and we weren't really ready. We were about 2 days behind schedule. He said, well, we're going to go out and we're going to shoot anyway. So you have different lights to do different things. You have lights that you know that are never going to go into the water, and they're one kind of light. You have lights that will go underwater, and there's, at that time, they were like basically lights that were sealed in a jelly jar and sealed up, except that they couldn't burn out of the water because they would, in a few minutes, they would just explode because of the heat of the bulb inside. So that first night, I could notice, oh my God, the lights are going out there, lights are going out there. And John, the gaffer, and I, we would send people to the back of the ship, around the back of the ship, to go into that jungle back there and say, you know, go to the whatever's not working. And the problem that night was these guys would go back and they couldn't find their way out because it was just a maze back there.
They were lost.
They were lost. So, I mean, so it was a no-brainer. I mean, the next night we had grids everywhere. Your working grid, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, A, B, C, D, and you're working, you know, it was so big you just had to compartmentalize the whole thing.
Was it satisfying sometimes to see the set, this huge set with all the lights on, or were you on the stress of the moment? Did you
know, it was interesting because, I mean, this kind of goes back how I'm wired. As a kid, I saw these amazing movies, and I wanted to do that. I really wanted to do something on the epic scale, but as a person, I was certainly not the person to make that happen. I mean, but to work with Jim, who is going to go, okay, I don't care if this is the biggest movie we're doing, whatever. So I get to be part of that process. So, but for me, the whole experience was, and it, you know, on other films, you have a sense of satisfaction of, oh, we shot the scene today, and didn't the actors do great, and didn't we nailed it, and we really shot this right. Not so much on Titanic. It was just, it felt to me like one crisis after another.
Even with the most intimate moments?
Even with most intimate moments, there were times I'm still thinking about, okay, how is this set? Because what would happen is we'd shoot something big on the ship, then we would come inside to do the more intimate scenes, and while things were being done on the ship. So we were constantly shooting and kind of running off to see, are we going to be ready? So it was, there was a lot of that. And it's, I don't know, it was just like, in the sense of kind of a living dream, it's like you wake up in your dream and you're working on this just enormous project. And it's kind of like a dream, but you say, well, I'm here in the dream, I better get going. And that's, I think that's how that project was.
At the time when the movie was being made, you know, there was a lot of press, like really bad press, you know, for the movie. I'm pretty sure it was like really an added pressure for Jim.
It was weird because, you know, on a Friday, I have some really terrible photos because I never thought, you know, I'd be showing them to people. They're kind of fuzzy, but they show aspects of how the film got made that I just don't see anywhere else. But one of the things that was going on, especially as we were starting the movie, was like one of the papers, I think it was Variety, had this box on the front page. You know, it was like a little obituary. To me, it looked like an obituary. And they do a little article on what else went wrong on Titanic. And they made it sound, well, two things I really disliked. They made it sound like safety wasn't a major concern, but safety was a major, major concern. We had crews that spoke Spanish, English, and Hungarian, and we would have very long morning meetings because everybody, you know, safety was a real concern. And I read things and I said, no, that's not what's going on. And then other things were like, well, they're just down there and they're just throwing money into the ocean. You know, they're just wasting so much money. And that wasn't it. It was not, it was just turned out to be, I mean, it was a big project that just turned out to be bigger than anybody thought. And sometimes things didn't work the first time, you know. And this is what I think is amazing about Jim, though, is he will not rush himself if he thinks it's going to affect the quality. You know, he doesn't crack under
the pressure.
Yeah.
But what about you?
Well, I mean, as a cinematographer, I mean, I would read those things and I'd just go, wow, it's early in the going and the knives are really out now. And Jim, I'm sure Jim sensed that and read that. I've mentioned this before, but And I can't remember when it was in the film. Maybe we were halfway through. And Jim is a person I usually consider as having just a laser intensity kind of attention. And he doesn't daydream or anything like that. Like, you know, we all kind of give ourselves some time during the day just to, okay, just rest the mind. That doesn't seem to happen. But we were waiting for something to get into place, and he said, I can't, I'm just going to paraphrase. Basically, he said, the bitch of this really is that I'm going to have to go back to 20th Century Fox and make an action movie that I'm sure is going to make a lot of money. He says, because he says, I don't know about this. He says, this was my art film. You know, this is as close to an art film as I'll ever get. And you know, so he knew, you know, and by this time he'd given up some of his money. On the other hand, I'll just wander all over the place. While we were making Avatar, the two Avatar movies, you know, you're just looking at the enormous amount of people who what it takes to make what basically becomes kind of a handmade film. And it's like Jim made it by himself. But he enlists the talents of so many people in so many departments. And he said before, you've probably heard him say this, he said, really, I'm just a grand provocateur. I go to my crew and I say, have you ever thought about this, and this is, you know, and kind of say, and then just throw out the bait, the challenge. And they'll come back in a few months or many months, and they'll have what he needs. But where I was going to go with this is just that I don't think he knew the film was going to make that much money. No. Fox certainly didn't know. Nobody knew. No, it was just like, that was a big surprise. But like when we were doing Avatar 2 and 3, and he said something, he says, well, he says, to make any money on these films, they have to be like between the first and the fourth highest grossing films of all time. And he just threw that out, like, you know, that's how I got it figured. Yeah, and that is the thing. I've never seen anybody who can dream that big and yet back it up with delivering, you know, and at least something that's pretty amazing. You know, so.
Speaking about the most intimate thing about Titanic, there is one shot I especially love, like everybody else, I guess. It's the big reveal of Kate Winslet.
Oh my God.
The crane shot when she's going out of the car.
Yeah.
What did you do to this shot? Because it's very amazing.
Well, first of all, I probably have to say Kate did 80% of the work herself.
I'm not sure about that.
Based on, I've never seen anybody, you know, and she was in her 20s, whose skin was as luminescent as hers. Yeah. And I'm really glad you asked that. I don't know if I think I've talked about this. So we're in the middle of, and Jim said, he says, remember My Fair Lady? Do you remember how Audrey Hepburn was revealed? He says, her hat, the brim of her hat is like the curtain going up. He says, I want to introduce Kate's character as though the theater curtain is going up. And how if we're going to do that is come in from the top. You know, it's a really brilliant way of doing it. And, you know, now it would be done because we're in the digital age. But back in the old days, you know, it was all shot on film. I was just down by the cameras, just kind of looking at this happen. And the thing that I did at that time was, what if I just bake her skin a little bit? So I just kind of reached over. Yeah, I reached over, and whenever she did this, I just opened up the exposure that much. And that's what gave that, I mean, besides Kate, that's what gave that glow. And we had a lovely amount of bounce light coming in to help with her skin. But sometimes you just go, sometimes it's just the last second things that you think of.
You didn't prepare this.
I didn't think about that until I was actually watching it happen. And I said, maybe there's something else we can do here, you know,
it was like an improv.
What?
Like
improv.
Improv.
Yeah.
The other thing about Jim's films is I don't know. I thought True Lies was a pretty big film, especially for me at that time, and then Titanic. But at the same time, you've got this amazingly big film where you think everybody's just all buttoned up. Sometimes it looks like it's just, you know, 8 people in a garage trying to figure out how to invent something. And there's a real feeling of, you know, and I really felt it. Oh, here's this huge film, and we're just trying to figure this out, you know, the day before we shoot or something like that. It was really, but some things are improv. The dance in the third below decks and you know, it was taking place in what really looked like you know, exactly what it should look like. But as soon as I heard the music, because they started the musicians really early in the day, and I went like, my lighting is not doing it here for the amount of the great energy that's coming from this music. So thank God it was a set. I said, Jim, I'm just going to cut a bunch of holes in the ceiling. And we cut basically where they would go. So there were these very hot shafts of light coming down where they would go 4 to 5 stops hot. And finally, it's like the energy of the lighting and the dance. You know, and as a cinematographer, you're always thinking, what can I get away with? Because sometimes you try something and it just jolts the audience and they go, I'm not buying that, or that took me out of the movie. You just go, this was kind of a no-brainer in terms of, you know, doing it. But, you know, sometimes you don't think of things until later in the game.
How much did you take the reality of the Titanic into account? I mean, for instance, the lights on the boat, there are very early electricity lights. Did you think about that? Did you have
well, that was one of those big problems with say, the technology in 1996, which to me, you know, to you sounds really old. To me, sounds just like yesterday. But we were dealing with sets that were built. Some sets were built to be dry, and some sets were built to be underwater, and some sets were built to be both. There's a picture of me standing in front of what would become the tank. It'll be an indoor tank. And it was basically built so you could have a set that was 2 stories high, but also a set that was 2 stories below water. So that tank would get filled up with water, and then as the tank is lowered into the pool, it looks like the water, of course, is coming
rising. Okay.
And this is like, you know, I said, this is just like 2 laptop, you know, those old plastic Apple computers. That's what was controlling this whole thing. And it was basically the whole set was kind of like you'd lower a coffin, you put the straps under, and then as the straps unwind, the coffin lowers into the ground. Well, basically, that was it. It was just, except that it went up and down with these big hydraulic winches. And those were some of the more dangerous sets to work. But we shot the big, huge dining room dry near the beginning of and then we shot a lot, and a lot of it didn't get into the movie, but of the sinking in that room and what was happening in that room as Titanic was sinking. And that was one of those timing things where you have these lights that are, all the tables had lights. We knew when we were about to start the scene and everything was, that we had, you know, a few minutes before those lights would start exploding. So these tables had to sink down underwater. You know, those were kind of like old-fashioned now problems that you would have. But those scenes took a lot of time to do. All the scenes, sinking scenes in the water, took a lot of time to do. Not only for the purposes of safety, but all the lights have to be tied down. And the rule of thumb, I mean, it takes like 6 times longer to do something in the water or underwater than it does if you were working in a dry room. So those scenes took a lot of time to happen. I don't know if I answered your question.
Oh, you did answer a lot of them, but we want to talk a little bit about Avatar.
Yeah.
You know, the thing is that, you didn't work on the first one?
No.
Yeah. And it took some 20 years, you know, between Titanic and Avatar, The Way of Water, you know. Did you find any change in terms of how James Cameron was working?
Well, first of all, the technology was so different. And then it's 20 years later, and Jim, again, the intensity is still there, but he seemed like, in a way, he seemed like a much looser person. And I mean, when he's not working, he can be, as you probably already know, he can be a very humorous and even self-deprecating guy. Yeah. And yet that kind of worked its way out on the set while we were shooting. There was a humor, looseness, and I mean, he could tell, you know, he's always watching, and he's always very particular about certain things, but still, again, in terms of, well, again, it was so different, but in terms of the experience of working with Jim again, it was really, really different, you know, and here we are. I mean, we're much older, and we've probably made a lot of the mistakes we're going to make in life, and that. But the whole experience was different because I don't know how much Jim has talked about this or how much, I'm sure there's tons out, but basically the movie is made 4 or 5 times. Starting with long before I show up, even though I did lighting on some of the scenes in the computer, but long before I show up, the first thing starts with the script, and then during the script period, he says, well, our writers have to know what this looks like. And by this time, he hired 2 really great production designers. And now the writers can see, you know, because he's working with a team, and they feed off that. The scenes develop, and then they develop into the point where now you need a much more realized set, which is, of course, a virtual environment. And it's not like it takes 5 minutes to cook that up. It takes a long time. So these processes make the gestation period much longer. And then finally, at a certain time, Jim will start working with, basically with stand-ins for the actors, and also who are also stunt people in the blue costumes, and he'll work out the blocking of the scene even before the actors are there. And now, I mean, he has so much.
It's like an animatic.
Pardon?
It's like an animatic.
And it's it's like and then he can edit the scene, and then if he doesn't like where an actor is or the scale is something, he can move that around. He can say, okay, now that I've got these people here, I don't like where that waterfall is, and he can say, bump the waterfall over this. And have you seen pictures of the brain bar? I mean, it's just so many people, very talented computer people who make this all happen. But it really does take this battery of people for him to shoot in. And so now he's starting to work now out on what he called the volume, which is basically what looks like the most boring empty space you'd ever imagine. But then if you walk over and look at the big monitors, you go, my God, that's amazing, you know? look what that flying pterodactyl-like creature just did, you know? And it was during that period of watching him, because well, you see how the layers come on. Then he's got, now he can bring in his actors, and now he can shoot with his actors. And you know, while he's maybe have one virtual camera going as he's working out the blocking, he has all these other cameras around who are offering up different potential angles that the editors can use. So they have an enormous amount of information And then he starts to work with the actors. But that time, I don't know, the film's been made 3.5 times at least.
When do you arrive in the process?
I arrived at the end of the acting process. I arrived, you know, and especially in the Avatar 2. I mean, it's definitely not the film to be a cinematographer on if you want that feeling of going with the flow every day.
Yeah. Okay.
Because if my job was to, okay, I see what the flow is, I see what where the visuals are going, and then I would get scenes to light, and I would say, okay, this groundwork has been, I mean, I know what this movie is, and what can I do that's interesting in it, and what can I, and then it would also, having done this, it would also help me to carry out what I thought was my chief duty, which was basically don't screw it up, which is basically when these human actors get into the scene, they have to look like they are there, and there has to be a complete continuity of the feel of the light. Sometimes it has to be extremely specific. So by that time, I have just a great crew of people, and they're all really, I mean, all the department heads are very proficient in their way with computers, and my chief lighting technician, Len Levine, he was lighting, we were talking about the live sets, and he was lighting sets and sending them off to New Zealand so these sets could be pre-rigged before we even got there. But again, it's kind of this weird thing. You go in and there's not all the information you want. So Len and I would say, okay, here's scene 47. Let's look at it. And so you go back into the computer and you see 2 shots. And you go to the editor and you say, where's the rest of the scene? And they say, well, this is really all we have now. And, you know, and it's because it's all being kind of built. It's not being built in some continuous.
Yeah, sure, of course.
It's all somehow concurrent. And so it's like it's amazing that people are all get ready to do this.
So you're not working with the light of the Weta Digital images, of the CGI images, the pure CGI images. Do you have an input on that?
Well, sometimes I would look at what was done before, and they could say, you want to see where all the lights are? And they just, okay, they would, and there's all the lights. And it's just diagrams, I mean, lines and triangles. And I just go, what am I going to do with this? I say, okay, well, what's the key source? Oh, well, that's the thick line over there. And you go, okay, I get that. And that was very valuable, especially when you were totally matching something. You wanted to be very clear about where the shadows were going to fall. Even as we were leaving to go to Wellington for the first time, the whole, it was just always moving, you know, the playing field, and that's true with, and Jim is thinking, I can improve this scene. You know, I think one of the most amazing things for me to watch when he was like blocking out some of the scenes in Avatar was, well, the scene that I was watching was actually nobody's seen yet, but let's just say he's got a scene with all these elements in them, and he would work and work and work and work that scene out. All the timing, like he said, okay, I'm going to try bringing in this flock of birds or whatever at this time, and they're going to land here, but this action on the foreground is happening here, and then but he's finding out where kind of the gift, the visual gift to the audience is, where this, I like every scene has something to watch. And I think the way he moves the camera is a way, especially in the 3D world, he's moving that camera because he wants the audience's mind to work. If they're having to do some work as the camera moves around and reveals certain aspects of the set, there, you know, there's just more mental immersion.
Yeah, of course.
So
You're being there.
Yeah, and then so when we got to Wellington, he would have he had another kind of a smaller replication of what he was doing in Los Angeles, and you know, up to the you know, in many scenes up to the last few days, he was refining things. You know, he's always, obviously, I mean, in terms of how the Avatar films do, I think he knows the type of film he's making. He knows something about his audience, but he also has this, I think, a really great respect for not throwing trash in the audience's face. He says it really has to be up to a standard that either has some visceral power to it or some poetry to it. So.
He told us that even at the last minute, sometimes, you know, he's adding scenes in high frame rate, you know. And I was wondering, we were wondering about this, you know, technology.
Yeah.
For you, I mean, is that something, is that a format that you like? Does it affect your lighting?
We had some conversations about this, and I mean, because my bad experience, and I think about this whenever I see, I mean, when I hear 48 frames per second, it was Peter's...
The Hobbit.
The Hobbit. And I had to leave. I left after 50 minutes because I couldn't take it anymore. There was something about it that just seemed to be upsetting. But what's going on we tested various shutter angles.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't have that feeling. In The Hobbit, you just feel like you're looking through an open window. But he wanted to bring at least back halfway this feeling of image blur that he felt would kind of take the curse off working at 48. But then in post, and I wasn't privy to this, I mean, 48 frames per second is just kind of an arena because he was doing all kinds of things, and he was doing things where for some shots, not a lot, he would work with a company that had developed software to replicate different shutter angles. You know, I heard people talk about, oh, well, this frame rate, it never bothered me. I was always immersed in I mean, when I went to see it as a viewer, I was immersed in it, and I think he'll do it again, you know, but probably he'll have even more refined tools to, you know, to maybe introduce some image blur that people, I guess what is kind of a default for people when they...
It's not for us, because the thing is that it's kind of, it adds to the naturalistic aspect of the movie.
And the immersion also. You were speaking about like a window open to a new world. It was very the fact. In the Ang Lee movies, for instance, it was the same. You know, there is no more screen. And the 3D and the high frame rates, for us, at least, it's very interesting.
Oh, really? Because my take is not as generous. You know, I really think I like the idea that films are dreams. And you probably, I'm sure, I don't know, 90% chance that you've heard Ingmar Bergman's quote about this. He says the audience participates in the dream. They go into the theater, and of course this reflects on the technology of the time. He says about half the time the audience is in darkness, you know, because and it's only the persistence of vision, but that makes it feel somewhat like reality. And he says he thought that whole process of light, dark, drew, like it helped with a willing suspension of disbelief, you know. And I don't know where things will go because it's still not a thing that I like, whether it's 3D or not. Also, what was different about Avatar, because it took so many parts to put it together. You know, usually if you're working on a normal movie, the camera is pretty front and center. Mm-hmm. But here, I mean, we were surrounded by computers all the time when we were shooting. And it was constant talk back and forth with the computer. But it was feeling like, okay, all this work has been done before. Mm-hmm. And I know what my duties are here. But then in the scope of things, it's not as camera-centric as, say, just shooting a normal movie. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it's challenging, but it's, and it may be the way things are going. But I think in terms of the fossilization now of Russell Carpenter, I think I like that older feel of
At the same time, one of the biggest challenge of Avatar 2, I guess, is the fact that when you're working on the set, you're surrounding with a blue screen. You have only a little bit of a set practical.
Oh, and that is the thing, and I'm sure Jim talked about, oh God, I forgot, something, simulcam.
Simulcam.
Yeah. And that was
the French
that.
create that.
Ah, yeah. and that was something that, I mean, that was worked on up until the last minute. Yeah. Uh-huh. And it seemed, what seemed like a real great it's not like last second, but it came in just a few months before, I think, I'm not making this up, before we started shooting, was using what kind of the technology that now focus puller is used to, so they can take all the data that's coming in from the tracking cams, and the tracking cams know where everything was, they know where everything was 6 years ago, if it was shot, shots, and where it's supposed to be. And now the tracking cams, this tracking technology knows that person is standing 2 feet behind the Na'vi. Mm-hmm. And that Na'vi is 3 feet behind that person. Mm-hmm. So knowing exactly where the depth is, the simulcam says, okay, we'll mat out him as he goes behind the person who's supposed to be in front of him, and we'll mat the Na'vi who's supposed to be there. And we'll give you a really, really, really good sense, even on the set, of what the dimension is like. And it was in
real time.
And in real time, basically in real time. I think the lag was only like a third or half a second. I mean, just because of the amount of computing that has to happen. But, and for me, it was like a gift from the heavens, because I could tell, this person is running here, and at this microsecond or whatever, he's supposed to come into a shaft of light and stay there for, half a second. And you could tell, whether it was working or not. And that's insane. That's an insane gift to anybody. And it was, and to know, to see a playback too, and just know, well, everything came together on this. There's nothing that, that kind of gives this whole game away of, taking live action and making it, I would have, my nightmare starting out was that I would do some work and it would come back looking like Viva Las Vegas, this is back in the 1950s where Elvis is,
such a very bad reproduction.
Yeah, very bad. That was my nightmare, or like Flubber or something like that, so with this technology, you could get just as nuanced as what was happening in all the work that people had done before.
Non, tu veux pas parler de la couleur bleue?
Go ahead.
Okay. No, because when we're thinking about Jim Cameron images, we are thinking about blue and the
Yeah.
cold blue is using. And well, go on.
Well, I don't know. It's like, God, you know, there's so much to talk about it, even on Titanic, is that he really believes that I'm going to present a reality of what nighttime looks like.
Yeah.
And I know it's not what people normally see, but it's kind of beautiful blue, and it's what I want to see. And within, 30 seconds, people are going to be on board with it. I mean, and nobody. And when I first shot True Lies with him, I said, "Hey, this feels really bright, you know." And he says,
no?
"Yeah." And he says, "Yeah, I don't care." He knows what he likes, and it is just, it's always seemed to be part of who is.
With the HMI during the 90s, it was very important for him.
We would start with an HMI, and then maybe add a little gel, and then in post, so it could get baked into a blue that was actually not quite like any other blue that people had seen. Yeah.
Quite quickly, what would you say makes? What did you learn from James Cameron working with him? First of all, and then what would you say makes him a unique filmmaker?
Wow. Well, first of all, I've never seen anybody who's, when he has an idea that something will work, I've never seen anybody so sure. And he has the confidence, and I think he had it almost from day one, that he's the filmmaker, the studio's not the filmmaker, and that he will hold his cards close enough that the studio can't really, tell quite what's going on, keep some control that way. But it is control over the timing of the project, the amount of time he has to take on something, the things that he will try. Sometimes on Titanic, our joke was, well, plan A failed, and it did sometime. You don't want to know what plan B will be, because plan B is going to be 3 times as complex as plan A was. He just ups the ante. And I mean, for me, I've never seen anybody like that, who's that much a force of nature and sure of his vision. Those are the main things.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Boy, guys, you guys have just...
We had a lot of questions again.
You had... It looks like you've done so much homework.
Oh yeah, but
we're very passionate about that,
Yeah.
And I had a lot of questions about Hard Target as well. And